Mrs. Thatcher has had an unusual campaign for a Prime Minister. In recent European and American experience, voters have been rejecting those in office. But Mrs. Thatcher's been the front-runner throughout, and she chose to campaign far more on the government's record of professed resolution than on any future promises. The one question to which she's refused to put specific answers was the first one I put to her this morning. Mrs. Thatcher, we all understand the economic difficulties, but shouldn't you now tell the voters whether after another 5 years of Thatcher economics, if you win of course, we can then expect a substantial reduction in unemployment? Can we expect that?
All our policies are designed to make for industrial recovery and prosperity and to increase the number of genuine jobs available for British people. I believe that new jobs are coming in. Indeed, the figures show it. They're coming in the new electronics, and they're coming in new businesses. You asked me to give a precise time that I cannot give. I cannot tell you how many strikes there will be. I cannot tell you what upheavals there will be in the world. But I believe that those policies will soon begin to show.
But assuming the best hypothesis for once, that there are no wars and no strikes, can't you even bring yourself to say that the total would then be lower, or would it be higher, or just about the same?
I believe the policies will begin to work in new businesses and new products. I cannot say how many the British people will buy. I can't say how many the world will buy. Neither can anyone else. I can say the opportunities are there. It depends upon us, not only government, but everyone in industry and everyone who purchases to try to buy British. And for those who produce British, it depends upon them making the goods that other people want to buy. The opportunities are there. The numbers of unemployed should be down, and should be down certainly by the middle of the next Parliament. I hope they will be, but it depends upon the whole of the British people as well as on the government.
Aren't you a little bit surprised that with 3.5 million unemployed, you remain so popular?
No, because I think people realise that it's a problem that afflicts the whole of the Western world, and it came about through 2 world recessions in the last decade, one on top of the other, the second one before we'd fully recovered from the first. And to some extent, of course, we got over the first by lending enormous sums of money to the developing countries, and now they can't afford the interest on it, let alone the repayment. So we've had the backwash of the first recession hitting us at the same time as the second one. They know that's affected everyone. They know, too, there were enormous inefficiencies in British industry. They know that we paid ourselves more than was warranted by increased output. They know that some government had to take its courage in both hands and put that right. And they think, if I might say so, that it's right to put it right, and that the time has been now, and that we are putting it right. And therefore, I think what they want is for us to continue along that path, because that offers the best chance of recovery and the best chance of more jobs in Britain.
But you weren't so popular, if I may put it clearly, before the Falklands came along. Now, the Falklands has been mentioned quite a lot in this campaign, and I don't want to go into the specifics, except to ask this. Without the Falklands, do you think people would have been prepared, as they seem to be, to have accepted your leadership like this?
Before we had the Falklands, the British people knew that we'd set our face on a course for the long term, and we were determined to pursue it. Mr. Emery, I always used to be asked by commentators like yourself, and when you're going to do a U-turn? I've never asked it today. They knew that I would not do a U-turn, and they knew it before Falklands, because they knew that we'd set our face to do what we believed to be right, and we'd stick to it. It was the same thing, the same quality, which came through when the great Falklands crisis hit us. We had to do what was right, we had to do what we did, and I don't like it in this campaign, the whole of the British people were behind us, of all political parties, so let's not say any more about it.
Well, just to put it this way, if I may, I think the question is this. Without the Falklands, do you think you would have been in the position you are tonight?
I think you would have found that the same determination and resolve to get things genuinely right would have shown through, and that people would have realized that was the right way to go. And if we didn't do it, we wouldn't have a chance in the future to compete with the Japans and the Germanys and the newly industrialized nations. You don't compete, you don't get a higher standard of living by sitting back and redistributing a lower standard of living. You only get it by rising to the challenge of our times and saying, we're the most inventive, scientifically able, technological people. We are going to turn that into industrial success in order to get more jobs and a better standard of living for our people. Rise to the challenge. Don't sink back and say, well, there's nothing I can do about it.
In all the talk, and I know you've denied it, of a hidden Tory manifesto, many people, including your own supporters, worry about the problems you'd face with the growth of spending in our economy. So the question is, why are you concealing from us the tough choices you're going to have to make? Why haven't you, in your asking for a mandate, gone out and said, look, we're going to have to reduce expenditure, and these are the tough choices we're going to face?
And I'm sorry that you're not correct. I'm not concealing in any way the tough choices. And indeed, when I've been faced with rival promises that other parties are going to put up this, this, and this, I've been the first to say, no, I'm not going to promise more. I'm not going to enter into an auction of public promises. I know what that would mean on taxation. I know what it would mean on national insurance contributions. I know what it would mean on the burden of industry. I have concealed nothing. Indeed, it's been I who've said, you will not be able to do that because of the constraints upon you of public expenditure. And don't forget, governments have no money of their own. They have to get every penny piece from the British taxpayer and from British industry. I've been the person who's brought that to the fore. We've laid out our public expenditure plans for the next 3 years. You know and I know. Every year those are reviewed by every government, and it would be misleading to say otherwise, because you have to manage your financial affairs well.
But you've only said in your manifesto that you'll control public expenditure. The Williamsburg communique, which you've used in your own support, said expenditure must be reduced. So I'm asking really, if you'll say now, what is it and where that you're going to have to make deep cuts in?
I'm sorry, you're asking an artificial question. You know full well, Mr. Emery, that every government has to look at the public expenditure plans and review them every year. It lays them out. It has a contingency reserve. That amount of that contingency reserve is published. I do not know what political crises there will be. I do know that the two reasons for world recession were first the war in 1973 in the Middle East, secondly the events of Iran, and that no one could foresee those. I think you're on an artificial question. We have indicated by our financial stewardships that we in fact spend money where it has to be spent. We spend it well. We try to get value for money, and we're very conscious that every penny we spend has to come from the British people, and where we can get better services by putting them out to private companies, we do so. That careful stewardship will continue, and we wish to continue as we have carried on in the 4 years, and either to indicate that you can know just exactly what will happen in public expenditure. You can't. You don't know how many people there'll be on Social Security. You don't know whether there'll be a particular, supposing there were a smallpox thing and we had to spend massive amounts on vaccination. It would be spent. Of course it would.
But other things would have to be cut. That's why I don't think it's artificial.
No,
it's central to the
Emery,
debate.
there is a contingency reserve. That is what it is for. And in the past, it's quite often had to go to give more money to the nationalised industries because they've overspent very considerably. Again, we're getting their budgets under control.
Does it ever gnaw at you in the small of the night that you might, like Harold Wilson, suffer an upset and be defeated?
It is a possibility you always face. The system that brings you in is a system which can put you out, and the important thing is that the system continues. And so, yes, of course it does occur to you. It does not gnaw at you because what you're concerned with doing is putting your positive policies forward the whole time, defending your record, correcting wrong impressions which have been put forward, and you're getting on the whole time with the positive thing. I believe that we have a reasonable chance of winning.
Finally, Mrs. Thatcher, in your view, what is at stake tomorrow for the voters?
I think a fantastic amount. The manifesto upon which the Labour Party are fighting is the most extreme ever put before Britain. It would alter our whole way of life. It would give government more powers than any government has ever had or wished to take before. It would alter the British way of life. Abroad, it would upset the NATO alliance and totally upset all our arrangements with the European community and industry here. It would be the most dislocating, disastrous manifesto I've ever encountered. Ours would enable us to continue the work we have begun, to put things fundamentally right, to get more jobs, genuine jobs, and to be a staunch and reliable ally. And I believe to be a proud Britain.
Mrs. Thatcher, Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Well, those interviews conclude our coverage of Campaign 83. A campaign, incidentally, that's already concluded for one Liberal candidate for whom alliance has another meaning. He's gone off on his honeymoon. His agent said there wasn't much more to be done to win in the final 48 hours, and that's in a marginal constituency. Well, who is the lucky man and in which constituency? You'll find out after the polls close at 10 p.m. tomorrow in our all-night results programme on BBC One. Back now to John Humphreys.
Scotland Yard has started an investigation into allegations that A-level papers have been stolen and sold on a black market. 2 London Examination Board papers are said to be involved, today's A-level French and A-level History due on Thursday. It's said the stolen papers have been changing hands at £100 a time. It may mean thousands of pupils will have to sit the examination again. Roger Parry reports.
The papers came from the exam board's dispatch offices in central London. A man claiming to be a board employee handed packets of questions to a newspaper to expose what he called appalling security. Scotland Yard are now investigating allegations that the papers are selling on the black market, and the exam board are considering their next move.
If the investigations which are now being undertaken reveal that the question papers were in fact compromised, then we will almost certainly set another question paper, which is in fact being printed now in sufficient quantity, to send out to schools for them to take later on in the course of the examination period.
This is the first time there's been such a breach of security at the London board. There's no doubt that the papers that were taken are genuine. Police and officials are now trying to find out how many copies may have been seen by candidates before making any order about a possible resit. For candidates leaving today's exam, it came as bad news.
Oh, no. I wouldn't want to. No, I'd rather take the risk about other people having looked at the papers. I think so. They won't have leaked out very much at all.
Oh God. No, I wouldn't like to resit it again.
Terrible. Well, we'd have to redo everything. I mean, we might be better prepared, but I don't think we'd like to go through all that again for a reset.
President Reagan has said he's willing to be more flexible in the nuclear missile talks to try and get negotiations with the Russians moving again. His envoy, Edward Rowney, arrived in Geneva today to put new proposals to the Soviet side. He said he was a little more hopeful. These are the START talks about big intercontinental and submarine-based missiles each side has pointed at the other, not the talks about missiles in Europe like Cruise and SS-20. President Reagan is now offering to relax his earlier demands for a limit of 850 missiles each. That's provided the number of warheads is no more than 5,000 each. He's also offering to negotiate what's called throw weight, aiming for a balance in the power of the 2 missile forces. From Washington, Martin Bell.
The President announced the change of position in a speech in the White House Rose Garden. He said the Americans still wanted a 5,000 warhead limit, but would not now require both sides to destroy so many of their missiles. And that had long been a sticking point with the Russians.
I have now directed our negotiators to adjust our position on deployed ballistic missiles by relaxing our current proposal for an 850 deployed ballistic missile limit. At the same time, the United States remains firm on the point that the destructive capability and potential of ballistic missiles must be addressed in START. To the leaders of the Soviet Union, I urge that this new opportunity not be lost. To America's friends and allies around the world, I say that your steadfast support for the goals of both deterrence and arms control is essential in the future.
The President also appealed for a bipartisan spirit and said these days might be spoken of in the future as the time when America turned a corner.
Nicaraguan diplomats are leaving the United States tonight as relations between the 2 countries reach a new low. The Nicaraguan ambassador was ordered to remove 21 diplomats and their families and close all 6 consulates in America. Staff began packing immediately. It's in retaliation for the expulsion of 3 American officials by the Nicaraguans. They've now returned home, denying charges that they plotted to undermine the Nicaraguan government and to assassinate some of its leaders. In Beirut, another guerrilla car bomb has killed 2 Israeli soldiers and wounded several others. It went off next to an armoured car in a convoy led by an Israeli general. He was not hurt. The bomb also wounded 5 civilians and a Lebanese policeman. 140 Israeli soldiers have been killed in Lebanon since last September. The 4 British relief workers held by guerrillas in northern Ethiopia are reported to have reached Kassala in Sudan on their way back to Khartoum. They're said to be well and relieved that their journey, delayed by floods, is nearly over. In South Africa, there's to be no reprieve for 3 guerrillas sentenced to die at dawn in Pretoria. An application for a stay of execution tonight was turned down. No reason was given. The 3 are to hang for bombings in which 4 policemen were killed. In London, demonstrators outside South Africa House called for a halt to the executions. There have been forceful pleas for a stay of execution from Britain, the United States, European countries and the United Nations. They're afraid the deaths could lead to more violence. 3 other guerrillas have already had their sentences commuted. The Ministry of Defence say they're willing to pay salvage to the owners of the Spanish ship on which a Harrier landed when it ran short of fuel. The ship is expected in Tenerife tomorrow. A team of Royal Navy experts have arrived there to recover the £7 million plane. It's slightly damaged and cannot now fly. President Mitterrand has firmly told France's protesting policemen, "I'm in charge." He was being interviewed on television after a police union leader had threatened more demonstrations. The number of police sacked or suspended after last Friday's protest has now risen to 12. From Paris, Tim Sebastian.
2 years in office and the socialist popularity is falling sharply. Tonight, the president went on television to try to stop the slide. The questions focused immediately on the police, now at the centre of national controversy. Some officers have strongly criticised Monsieur Mitterrand. He told them the authority of the state will be respected. It wasn't a confident leader who had to tell his police force, "I'm the one in charge." What provoked the row was a demonstration last week by extreme right-wing police officers. They want the government to crack down on crime. Some of them went on to raise fascist salutes outside the window of the Justice Minister, who happens to be Jewish. They're a minority, but they've given Monsieur Mitterrand cause for concern.
Very serious, I think so, and all the policemen think like me too.
Do they think the government has been too soft?
Too soft. Certainly, it's too soft actually for us. It's not normal situation. Justice, it's no good in France, actually.
A handful of senior officers have been sacked after the demonstration, but more are planned in the next few days. Monsieur Mitterrand will need more than television to restore confidence among his police and his public.
The Pope will be in Poland later this month, and he's expected to have a meeting with Lech Wałęsa, the leader of the Solidarity Union outlawed by the military government. It'll be in private. The BBC won't be sending a television team to cover the Pope's tour. That's because 2 of our correspondents, Tim Sebastian of Television News and Jan Repper of the External Services, have been refused visas by the Polish authorities. We will have coverage of the visit, though. Arrangements are being made with the American networks and Eurovision. A year ago today, 56 soldiers lost their lives in the tragedy at Bluff Cove. 42 of those men were in the Welsh Guards, and it was to honour their memory that 70 of their relatives travelled to a church in West London for a special memorial service. Neil Bennett reporting.
Bluff Cove was the worst disaster of the Falklands campaign. The Welsh Guards were about to go ashore and join the push towards Port Stanley when their landing ships, the Sir Galahad and Sir Tristram, were bombed by Argentine aircraft. Many of the wives, parents and children of the men who died are bitter over the unexplained blunders they believe led to such great loss of life. They're still waiting for some answers about what happened a year ago, although today their voices were raised in tribute. Many of the relatives went on to the Guards' own chapel, which they complained should have been made available for the memorial service. The regiment says another service will be held there when a commemorative plaque has been finished. A letter was also taken to Downing Street, calling for a national memorial to the Welsh Guards in Cardiff. The families are determined that their sacrifice shall never be simply consigned to history.
Why should they forget heroes? Why should they forget 18-year-old boys? Yeah. I mean, we certainly won't forget, and I'm sure I don't want the public to forget what my son's done. It's incredible. No one knows any answers. People were there, but no one knows. Someone is to blame. I'll never let that rest until I find out.
The show jumper Caroline Bradley has been buried at Priors Marston in Warwickshire. Miss Bradley collapsed moments after riding in a competition at Ipswich last week. The cause of her death is still unknown. More than 200 people crowded into the church of St Leonard's. Many more who couldn't get in heard the service relayed by loudspeaker. The British show jumping team delayed their departure for a competition in Paris to attend, and there were tributes from other leading figures from show jumping. The mourners were told that in less than 20 years, Caroline Bradley had brought happiness and pleasure to millions. In the last few minutes, we've heard that one of the candidates in the general election has been taken to a Belfast police station after scuffles broke out between his supporters and the police. Mr Gerry Adams, the provisional Sinn Féin candidate for Belfast West, was one of the number of people taken away after police tried to remove an Irish flag from the Sinn Féin supporters. The police won't say whether Mr Adams will be charged or released tonight. Tomorrow sees the start of the most prestigious competition in one-day cricket, the Prudential World Cup. Apart from South Africa, all the world's main cricketing nations will take part. But as Mike Blakey reports, the competition's future is far from certain.
112 of the world's top players had a reception at Buckingham Palace in the morning before an official lunch at Lord's to launch the Prudential World Cup. It's the third time the tournament's been held in this country, but it could be the last. First of all, the sponsors are pulling out, and there's no sign of anyone else taking over. Secondly, the growing fears of links with South Africa could split the cricketing world. The ruling body meets at the end of the month, and 2 weeks later, members of the MCC vote on whether to send a team to South Africa. And there's little doubt that during the tournament, many of the top players will be offered a fortune to play there.
Well, it's quite because of human nature. I presume that they would be tempted, but I still think that cricketers are still doing pretty well now, at least the majority of them. We're getting better. I think just the monetary side of it is getting much better, and I think that they should take, you know, they just have to weigh up the pros and cons. I mean, nobody's going to stop them from going, but it'll probably cut short their international career.
The competition begins tomorrow with 4 matches building up to the final at Lord's on June 25th. It could be the last chance to see such a collection of talent in this country.
And the headlines again. Police are investigating an alleged black market in A-level papers. Thousands may have to sit the exams again. President Reagan says he's willing to be more flexible on strategic arms talks with the Russians. And the main story tonight is 9 hours to go before polls open for the general election. All 3 major parties say they're confident, but the polls show the Tories still well ahead. And finally, now that it's all over, bar the voting, a brief look back at the last 3.5 weeks. Not the speeches or the issues, just a few of the images from a campaign in which the leaders have collectively clocked up more miles than ever before. you can manage to stay awake, we'll be on the air pretty well all tomorrow night with the BBC's special results programme. The 9 o'clock news actually starts at 9:30. The polls close at 10, and within minutes we'll have the first idea of how the voting's gone. Election 83 will stay on the air until 4 a.m. But from us, for now, good night.
Election 83.